Welcome to Bible Study, Parody, and Subversion in Matthew's Gospel. So I'm really excited to have on the program Dr. Timothy Lewis, creator of the podcast Masculinity and author of the upcoming book, The Poetics of Matthew 1, which is the result of 6 years of study of the first chapter of Matthew. I'm excited because I think Dr. Lewis has discovered a major interpretive key for Matthew's narrative, an interpretive key that helps make the book of Matthew more coherent for modern readers. If you've been listening to this podcast, you will likely remember that I've talked about how this gospel, Matthew's gospel, undermines the patriarchal structure of the Roman Empire and ancient Mediterranean society. The empire was structured through a pyramid of households, each led by a patriarch. At the top of the pyramid stood Caesar as the grand patriarch of the empire. The Roman Empire was understood as Caesar's house. So the Gospel of Matthew challenges the whole societal structure of patriarchy. Matthew starts out with a genealogy that I have called a parody of pedigree because it highlights the sins of the fathers and ends by letting us know that Jesus is not a son of any of those guys, but rather a son of God through the woman Mary. Jesus teaches his disciples to recognize only one Father, the one in heaven. And in chapter 23, he says, "Call no one on earth Father." He inverts the male honor code and instructs his disciples to put aside their male privilege and be like eunuchs, which were not considered male. Eunuchs were not considered male in the ancient world. He is anointed at the hands of a woman, and he's abandoned by all his male disciples at the end. Only women remain close by through his crucifixion, and they even remain standing at the empty tomb when an angel comes, causing all the male soldiers to faint. So Dr. Lewis has discovered patterns in the story, especially in chapter 1, but also beyond chapter 1, that deepen this understanding of Matthew as a text that not only undermines patriarchy, but challenges men to change by redefining or reforming masculinity, hence the name of his podcast, Masculinity. So Tim, if I may call you that, welcome to the show.
Yes. Hi, Bert. It's good to be here.
Great. So, Tim, you are in Australia, and what is your hometown?
I'm in, it's a small town in the Yarra Ranges, just outside metropolitan Melbourne.
Well, welcome. You're, I think, 18 hours ahead of us. It's 5 p.m. there, so it's Thursday here, but Friday for you. Can you please tell us how you discovered this theme in Matthew? And perhaps you can start with what you discovered in the genealogy with the role of the 5 women in that genealogy.
Yes, absolutely. I didn't set out originally to study Matthew through the lens of masculinity, but I'm very fascinated by patterns. And so one of the big patterns in Matthew chapter 1 is the patriarchal pattern of men begetting men, patriarchs acquiring their heirs, with the mention of 5 mothers. And the more that I studied it, the more that I realized that the patriarchal theme is the theme that we're encouraged to read. Even the references to mothers are actually patriarchal references. And so there's been a lot of previous guesses looking at what exactly does it mean to have 5 mothers occasionally mentioned. And the more that I studied the next bit just after the genealogy, where it's focusing on Joseph's dilemma, and it's not really a story about Mary so much as it's a story about what will Joseph do, or what's he intending to do, what's he told to do, and what he ends up doing. And so I realized that at the 5th reference, when it introduced Mary, that was still focusing on Joseph's dilemma, because it says that Jesus was born or produced from Mary, whose husband was Joseph. And it's opening up this question that's a question of paternity and what's going on with Jesus and Joseph. Like, how is it that Joseph acquired his heir, Jesus, without producing his heir? So he acquires his heir passively, providentially, and we don't hear that story just yet. That's the story that's just about to be told in verses 18 to 25. But I noticed that the previous references to the mothers are also patriarchal references, focusing on how each of these patriarchs that are highlighted in 5 cases acquired their heirs in interesting ways. The patriarch in each case does not determine the heir that they acquire, which is really fascinating. And I think this is the pattern, the overall pattern, where it's actually saying something about the patriarchal prerogative to produce an heir, and that prerogative is missing in 5 cases. So the obvious case is the 5th and final case, because we can all see that Joseph doesn't determine, Joseph's not even the biological father.
Right.
But it hasn't really been noticed before. I found a few quotations where scholars have pondered the question of comparing some of the fathers, but then they usually don't think that that's the emphasis. But I think that is the emphasis in Matthew chapter 1, is it's setting up a patriarchal topic. And it's only been recently that I've thought of, like, is that the topic that continues? But I've just spent so much time in the first chapter, and I noticed that within this pattern of 5, there's also a continuing, there's a concentric or chiastic or symmetrical pattern, where the first mention of from a mother, because I mean it does seem strange that because every heir is produced from a mother.
Mm-hmm. But not necessarily in the patriarchal narrative, and that's what.
That's right. Why is it that only some heirs are said to be produced from a mother?
Right.
And this has caused a lot of speculation about, well, is there a pattern? And so if we look at the first time, it's with Judah.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at the story of how did Judah produce his heirs, he produced twin heirs from Tamar. Mm-hmm. Well, that story gets a whole chapter dedicated to how it was. And it turns out that it's not because Judah was planning it.
Right.
So that's the pattern that continues for all 5 cases.
Unplanned pregnancies.
Yeah, so it's the unplanning of the heirs, and they've all got surprise paternity. It's like the writer of Matthew is saying, surprise, notice who became known as the father. They didn't plan it. Mm-hmm. So Judah didn't plan it. Salmon didn't probably plan to end up producing his heir from a Canaanite sex worker. Mm-hmm. And Matthew's revealing, well, that's Salmon was the one who acquired Boaz as his heir from Rahab. Boaz does not plan to acquire an heir for himself. That's the point of the story of Ruth. He's planning to raise an heir on behalf of somebody else, Ruth's first husband in the line of Elimelech. And then it's only after the story finishes that we get this little genealogy that says, surprise, it's Boaz's heir. It goes into Boaz's lineage.
Right.
And then the 4th case is David producing his heir, Solomon, from another man's wife. Mm-hmm. That's obviously not what he was planning to do. And so, this is how I discovered that the patriarchal theme is there for a purpose to critique what's going on with the patriarchs.
Mm-hmm. And you even talked about, when we were talking earlier, you talked about how not only was Solomon an unplanned pregnancy, but it wasn't David's choice for the throne either.
That's right. It was only because of Bathsheba who made that happen. Otherwise, that wouldn't have eventuated. That wasn't what David had been. If it wasn't for Bathsheba, then Solomon wouldn't have ended up on the throne, because Bathsheba and Nathan conspire to convince David that would be the best idea.
Mm-hmm. So undermining, the way it's written out, it takes away the male agency, the patriarchal agency. The patriarchs are not in charge.
Yes, I think this is the point. It's pointing out the times when the patriarchs aren't making it happen. It's not their agenda to produce these heirs in this way. They're not making it happen. And that's what allows the Messiah to arrive. Mm-hmm. And I think this is part of the point of the providential theme, is that the heavenly patriarch has an agenda, so that the human patriarchs need to get out of the way of that agenda. And so it's highlighting those moments where it's not the patriarchal prerogative that's making it happen.
Right. So there is like a chiastic pattern.
Yes. So the first and fifth cases are designed to be parallel. So they're designed to be read together. So if we compare Judah discovers that Tamar is pregnant, and he doesn't think that it's going to be known as his child. He doesn't think he's the father of the pregnancy. So he makes a decision about what to do, and then that decision is overridden with some new information that comes to light, and that new information confers him with the status of paternity. This is exactly the same scenario with Joseph. In the fifth case, the man discovers that the betrothed woman is pregnant. So in both cases, a betrothed woman is waiting to enter the man's household. She's discovered to be pregnant. The man makes a decision, and then that decision is overridden with some new information which confers the man with a status of paternity. So these two stories are designed to be read in parallel to compare what's going on with the patriarch in terms of surprise paternity. What will the patriarch do? And I encourage people to compare the man's response, because the scenario is set up to be a similar discovery of pregnancy and then a similar outcome, but the man's response is what's highlighted to be extremely opposite. So if we compare how Judah responds in terms of how quickly rushed and rash his response is with Joseph, and he's got a considerate, slow response where he actually doesn't rush into everything, and then he goes and has a sleep. And Judah's response is also very judgmental and very public, whereas Joseph's response is being as non-public, as private as he can, and he's not being judgmental. So, it seems like the writer is deliberately encouraging people to think about the topic of patriarchy and the patriarchal interests, the patriarchal agenda, and how is the patriarch in each case behaving.
Right. So Judah, you have Judah and Tamar, Joseph and Mary. The similarity is that there's an unplanned pregnancy, and the patriarch, the man, finds out about it, and then the contrast is their response. So Judah responds by immediately publicly condemning her. If you go back and read that narrative, it's like, she's played the whore, and it's this huge condemnation. And then until she confronts him with his own signet ring and staff and shows him that he is the father, and so it highlights. So the story ends up highlighting the sin of that patriarch. Whereas Joseph, it's like the opposite. He it keeps it a secret so as to protect her, and does
Yes.
not immediately condemn her. He's just, and that is a big part of why he is said. It says he is righteous. So you want to talk about that?
Yes, yes. So one way to see that it's saying that Joseph's response is a righteous man's response compared to Judah, who hadn't been behaving rightly. Mm-hmm. One way is to compare and contrast Judah and Joseph. Another way to see this is to look at what it says just immediately after it says that Joseph, her husband, was a righteous man. It says two things that Joseph is not willing to do. Mm-hmm. He's not willing to shame her, and he's not willing to claim her as his own wife, and her child as his own child. Mm-hmm. And this has caused a lot of confusion about, well, how can this be the examples of Joseph doing the right thing? Because it doesn't seem to match what we expect the outcome should be. But it's actually saying this is what a righteous man would do, because the definition of righteous man here means a man who is not doing what other men do. It's mm-hmm. atypical. Mm-hmm. So it's he doesn't have the typical inclinations that other men in Joseph's situation would tend either to say something about the paternity and disclaim Mary by distancing themselves, justifying themselves at Mary's expense, or they wouldn't say anything. They would claim, or they would publicly claim to be the father, or just claim, like, make it look like they really are the father and override the paternity. Like, whoever's child Mary is having actually has a greater right to have a greater say. Mm-hmm. And the child has a right to know their paternity, I guess, anyway. So it's actually two examples of men would tend to do these other two things, and Joseph's not going to do those two things. He's not. The usual assumptions about what a man doesn't apply to Joseph. He's not going to do the two usual things that other men in Joseph's situation would do, either one or the other.
Right. So that further shows how this is critiquing masculinity or reforming masculinity, because Joseph is righteous because he doesn't do what other men would do in that situation.
Yes. So basically, the word dikaios, righteous, mm-hmm. the definition that Matthew is using is one that appears later on also in Matthew, mm-hmm. Where it means innocent of what it might look like, that if we just were to predict what someone typically would do and what's typically going on, it doesn't work. It doesn't apply. Mm-hmm. So we could find the same definition elsewhere in Matthew, where later on Jesus refers to Abel from the book of Genesis as the righteous Abel. Mm. And in that case, it means innocent of what it might look like. It might look like Abel provoked his brother and he deserved what was coming, but no, that assumption doesn't work. He's innocent. He did not provoke his brother. He's completely innocent of that. And it's also used later on where Pilate's wife refers to Jesus as that righteous man. And in that case, it means it's not what it looks like. He's not actually a violent man threatening violence against the empire. He doesn't deserve to die. Right. He doesn't deserve death. Like that's no matter what it looks like, you've got the wrong guy. Like he's not guilty of those charges. So this definition of not being guilty of what it looks like, what other men would tend to do, is the basic definition which is also applying to Joseph, where Joseph's not going to be guilty of doing what other men normally do. And it's actually the same definition that's used in the Hebrew Scriptures. Mm-hmm. There's only two cases where someone is identified as a righteous man. I'm always surprised by this because there's lots of references to righteousness in general. But it's only Noah and Job who are said to each be a righteous man. So Noah is not guilty of what other men around him are doing. There's a lot of crime that's being committed by other men, and Noah's not guilty of that. He's just atypical. So we can see the same definition there, where it means he's an atypical man. He's not your typical man. You can't just take Noah to be an example of his generation, because he's the opposite of an example from his generation. And same with Job. When it says that Job was a righteous man, it means he's not guilty of doing what his friends are accusing him of having done. Like, his friends assume that he must have done something really bad to upset God, because everyone does this and everyone does that. But he's not. That's not accurate. He's not guilty of doing the things that men usually do. So again, that's an example of an atypical man.
What's interesting to me about what you just said, I just thought about this, is with Jesus, and I've actually, this is one of the things I've wrestled with in Matthew, is like, why does Pilate's wife call him righteous? Like, he is wanting to establish this new society, new kingdom, which should be a threat to Rome, right? So I'm thinking, like, why is he innocent? But if he's not, like, if we use your key to interpret this, that this is contrasting, this is redefining masculinity or critiquing the dominant paradigm of masculinity. What characterizes Jesus in Matthew is nonviolence. And so not only does he say, love your enemy, he actually says, love your enemy, turn the other cheek. You see it in his teaching, but he sort of wages this campaign, starts in Galilee in the north, ends up at the capital city in the south. So there's a lot of Davidic, Joshua imagery, Maccabean imagery, but in contrast to those men, he's not killing, he is rather healing and feeding people. He is giving life rather than taking life. So he's not killing. So that is another contrast. And so maybe that's what Pilate's wife, maybe that's what's behind. I don't know, I'm thinking more literally what the author is trying to convey when the author has Pilate's wife say Jesus is a righteous man. That starts to make more sense to me if I think of it in terms of reforming masculinity rather than him not being a threat. Like, because I think he was a threat,
Yes. I think if we go more into the atypical nature of what kind of man, and it's saying, okay, he's not the kind of man that, he's not just your typical man that you would assume. Right.
Yeah. This is why I'm excited about what you're doing. Your work is because you're finding, I think, I'd noticed some of this stuff, but this is more of a through line than I thought. It's more what your work is uncovering something that is a more consistent pattern than what I even was thinking. I certainly noticed it, but I didn't see it as deeply as what you've been perceiving. So let's talk about some of this theme in the rest of Matthew. I really want to talk about the eunuch passage. That's just the one that really excites me. But are there other before we get to that, are there other passages that you think are important in this theme that you want to talk about?
One of the passages that stands out for me because it connects with Matthew chapter 1 is the first two ethical teachings that Jesus is giving. And he seems to be particularly always giving his teachings to men. And that's something that I don't know why, but it's only very recently that I've really been thinking about this. Why is he teaching only men? Like this is he's not commanding women what to do. He's commanding men. He's inviting them to live certain ethics, which it always seems to be targeted to this issue of patriarchy and patriarchal interests and patriarchal topics. So the first two ethical teachings were about murder and adultery in terms of focusing on what the men are responsible and liable for, putting the onus on the men to be responsible for their own actions.
Mm-hmm.
And murder and adultery are the two sins that were hinted at in reference to how David produced Solomon.
Right.
So when it says that Jesus' mission will be to save his people from their sins,
Mm-hmm.
We probably should be thinking of patriarchal sins.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're listening to Jesus' teaching in Matthew, he seems to be depicted as teaching about patriarchal sins.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one that stood out to me in chapter 1, because the first two ethical teachings were addressing the same patriarchal sins that were hinted at in Matthew chapter 1. But I'm looking forward to studying more examples, and I really think that we need some more people to get on board and look at Jesus' teaching as addressing patriarchal sins, because I think that actually keeps coming up quite a lot. Even when Jesus is saying to his disciples about don't look for honorable titles for themselves. Don't look for the best seats.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try and gain honor for yourself by having the best seats, whether it be church or synagogue or in someone's house for dinner, or all these status things are actually very patriarchal things. Grasping at more honor, like wanting to have the best name, and to have the most say on things, to determine how things go, and to be seen in public. There's quite a few teachings about, well, don't do it in public. Like, you don't need to do good things for other people to see. You can just do good things.
Mm-hmm.
So don't do it in a way that shows off. So I think even in chapter 23, where Jesus is depicted as being appalled by Pharisees who are doing these things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think these are very patriarchal inclinations to be doing, looking for honorable titles, and wanting to sort of show off and be the
Right.
head. And it feels to me like Jesus is saying, well, don't think of yourself as, he's teaching men, don't think of yourself as being as wanting to get more status, but to think of yourself as low status. Don't think of yourself as a big fish in a small pond. Think of yourself as a small fish in a huge pond, where the greater kingdom is, it needs servants who aren't looking out for themselves and who aren't promoting their own interests.
Right.
And so I see that sort of carrying generally through every time that Jesus is teaching his disciples. And I'd like other people to help me think about this more too. With like, why do people think that Jesus is not teaching women? And what I can come up with so far is that in Matthew, I mean, it's different. It's slightly different in the other books. So Mark, Luke, and John will have a different thing to that they present Jesus. But in Matthew, it seems to be that Jesus is only teaching men, and it seems to be targeted to men's issues, that according to how it's presented in Matthew.
That was something I noticed, and then when I was talking with you earlier, and you picked up on that, I was like, yeah, it's and what's interesting is that, I've, as much as I have been understanding and reading Matthew as a liberationist text, is still, like, at the end of the day, it's still a male Messiah and male disciple, so very male oriented.
Yeah.
But if you understand that as he's teaching men to reform, to put aside male privilege and reform how they think about things, and kind of inverts the male honor code, then that kind of helps with why it's so male oriented, because it's addressing masculinity. It's addressing that. I first was tipped off to this back when I was in seminary many years ago, and we were reading the social science commentary on the Synoptic Gospels by two of the scholars of the Context Group. Their names are escaping me right now, but and I was reading about the Beatitudes in Matthew, actually, and they talked about it, how it's inverting the male honor code, and I think they even suggested, whether it was in that book or a different book, they even suggested that this could be understood as a female honor code by the time because it's an inverted male honor code. Yeah. This is the first time I was tipped off to this.
Yeah, encouraging the men to voluntarily do it. So he's not talking to men who are indentured servants. He's not talking to enslaved men or men who are incapacitated with diseases and illnesses. He's talking to men who are able-bodied men who have the potential to accrue wealth, to gain status in some form, to marry, to take wives, and to have children, to have houses. And at one point, Peter says, well, we've left everything to follow you, which shows that they had things that they could leave. And so it's a voluntary request that Jesus is encouraging men who are kind of like his peers, who he knows that he can ask them to voluntarily embark on this mission. So it's a voluntary subordinate kind of masculinity that is saying to lower their status. So he's not talking to people who already have the lowest status. Yeah,
that was another thing that we were talking about, how in the story world, it's Jesus, a peasant, talking to other male peasants. Yeah. In the author writes very well, is obviously educated scribe, and in Matthew, scribes and Pharisees are often the same group. So he may actually be a Pharisee, or a dissident Pharisee or whatever. But he's coming from, probably male. He's coming from a more privileged class, and so in the author's world, he may be speaking to other people of his class to put aside their privilege. So it's not telling people who are already oppressed, put aside privilege. In both the story world and in the author's world, I think the message is to people, to peers, as you said.
Yes, it's a voluntary subordination of patriarchal privileges. Yes.
The part that's just really intrigued me is when he tells them, and this is in a section where he's teaching a lot about putting aside privilege, be like a child, and then he says, be a eunuch if you can be a eunuch.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's another example of someone who doesn't have certain privileges that other men would have. So in this context, I think it's in the context of marriage. So it's assuming that eunuchs, that the ones that Jesus is talking about, they're not marriageable, like they're not eligible for taking a wife. No one's going to be wanting to have them marry their daughter. They're not going to be able to raise children, and they're not. They don't have the usual status of having full masculinity.
Right.
So I think this is another example of be like a child in terms of lower your status. Be like a eunuch, someone who doesn't have that full masculinity status and who can't even get married and have children. And it's a voluntary request.
Right.
Or be like a servant, I think, is another one. they all seem to me to be fairly consistent in the same message of this voluntary subordination of privilege.
Right. And and one scholar that I read that had studied the eunuch, the whole history, the literature around eunuchs, the way he described it is the eunuchs weren't even considered male because, they had lost that part of them, or that, their manhood had been taken.
Yeah, it depends which writer you're referring to. I think that Saint Augustine, in a few centuries later, says, "Oh, we give eunuchs the benefit of the doubt, and we count them as male, as if that's a way of upgrading them."
Like as if it's different. Yeah.
Yeah. So it depends who's writing.
Right.
We need to look at the context of what it is.
Yeah.
And in Matthew's context, it's in the context of marrying and reproducing. Right.
If nothing else, they can't become fathers. And that was a major thing. Like if you couldn't become a father, then because it's an honorable thing to be able to reproduce and be known as a father. Yeah. Right. And then he also, in the list, he also says there are some eunuchs that are born eunuchs, and they're born that way. And in the ancient literature, that the eunuch tends to be slang for like a gay male. So there's also that alignment there, it seems like.
Yes, I'm not as familiar with literature on. I remember a few years ago I downloaded a whole heap of articles to read, and I still haven't got around to reading them, on studying the different ways that people perceived eunuchs. Yeah, but it's interesting that Jesus mentions three kinds.
Yeah, three kinds, and you have to if there are born eunuchs, how I was teaching a Bible study at a church a few years back, and I said, "What do you think a born eunuch is?" And somebody was thinking, "So they're born with mutilated genitals or something like that?" Well, how widespread can that? I mean, that's be very rare. Like, why would Jesus mention it?
It could be also a reference to intersex, where a child is born with ambiguous genitals, not being clearly male or female. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe it's that. There was, though, I don't remember the guy's name, but I have to go back and look at the script from that episode that I did on the podcast. There was a conservative Christian scholar who was anti-gay, and even he says, no, that's a reference to a gay man. Like,
yeah.
So, So anyway, that it's just such an interesting passage that only Matthew has.
I know, it's such an interesting passage.
So, and it definitely seems to be about putting aside privilege. It was. I first discovered this through looking at the honor shame, and it was the context scholars, the context group of scholars who were looking at the cultural. They look at the cultural dimensions of the gospel, and they talk about honor shame, and one of the things they say is that in the ancient world that there was thought to be only a certain amount of honor, and like if you took more honor, it means someone else had to lose it, and therefore in order that everybody would have enough honor in God's kingdom and in the new society that Jesus wanted to initiate, everybody with honor needed to give it up so there'd be enough for everybody. So that was the way I first understood it. And then when I was teaching at the same Bible study, when I was talking about it, this one woman said, well, this is putting aside male privilege. She said it like that. Yeah. And so ever since then, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what it would be in our society. Okay, that's the modern analogy.
Yes. So yes, it's a different approach than what we would tend to think of doing in modern society, like a modern Western approach, where we want to raise women's rights so they have to have equal rights to men.
Yeah, we would do different. Yeah.
We've got a long tradition of elite men having all these privileges, and now we're trying to encourage similar set of privileges for women and raising up the women's rights. Where that's not the approach that we've got in the book of Matthew. It's targeting the men, reducing their rights, right. Which might have a lot to do with the limited amount of perceived honor. I whenever I hear about the limited amount of honor, I wonder whether that's compatible with what a lot of the writers of biblical texts have a more abundant view of God's resources. So perhaps it's true that people tend to have a limited view of things like honor, and I wonder if Matthew is encouraging a more abundant view of blessing that comes to those who participate in giving up their privilege voluntarily. That there is enough honor somehow in being involved in this new system of giving up honor, especially since it's voluntarily done. It's I still haven't done enough research in how it works throughout the whole book. Like the greatest kingdom, how does honor work? Yeah, that's something that I would like to encourage other people to keep researching as well.
Well, in the Beatitudes, it's kind of like, so the context group scholars were saying, like, you can translate this as honored are the poor in spirit, honored are the merciful, honored. So they're actually giving honor and sort of redefining what it means to be honorable. Because poor in spirit, if you take that, it occurs in the Dead Sea Scroll and the War Scroll as people who have been oppressed by a foreign power.
Yes.
In Isaiah, you have this kind of crushed in spirit idea.
Yes.
So it's a or an idiom that means the poor and the oppressed. And he's giving honor to people who haven't had honor, who've not been considered honorable. So he's giving honor to them. In the new society, they will be honored. It's the first will be last, the last will be first idea. And
it's a very interesting concept because it's challenging how can that be honorable? Like how I guess I still don't know quite enough of how. I feel like it does work somehow that there is honor there, but it certainly doesn't feel like it's a very honored position to be in sometimes. Although it does sometimes make me think that maybe that's about the insight that those people have. Anyone who has been crushed by the world in some way, to be of crushed spirit is there's an insight that comes to seeing the world and seeing the truth about how things are. So I do wonder whether that's what it's getting to, is that the honor of being closer to seeing how God sees.
Yeah, it could be, because right after the Beatitudes, he says to the people, he says, you are the light of the world, you are the salt of the earth. So so and light is, in the biblical by biblical writers, usually he's talking about shining light in darkness, so you reveal things. So it could and I know salt, there's some association with wisdom. I think that's a part of it. Are there any other things that we want to talk about before, because this is, I think, this is a theme, I think, that really makes the whole book more coherent if we think about it this way. If we think about overturning patriarchy and redefining masculinity, a lot of more things begin to make sense. in this. Are there any other passages you want to highlight?
No, I think I haven't yet become familiar enough with
Okay.
with the rest of the book. I'm still fascinated with the overall idea of. I can't believe I haven't really noticed how strongly this does seem to carry through, and it makes me wonder also about the second arrival of the Messiah, where if the first time in the first chapter, it's not the patriarchs that are making it happen. It's not the patriarchal agenda that's bringing the Messiah. It's exactly the lack of that, sidestepping the patriarchal agenda that helps to bring the Messiah. It makes me think about the perhaps that's setting up the way it should be working for people to bring the kingdom, so that by the time the Messiah arrives again, that's a way of encouraging the Messiah to arrive again, to finish the task. The task seems like it could be related to carrying through this idea of reducing patriarchal privilege. It seems like it's such an important way of introducing the book that maybe if we can see it working all the way through the book. And so, yeah, I'd love other people to
think about and to think about how does it affect the, what we call the second coming. And one way I've started to think about it in my podcast and in my work is the coming of the Son of Man definitely seems to begin at the cross. Like the cross is the coming of the Son of Man, but so is the resurrection. And then there does seem to be like this future time. So it's all one thing. But but how does that work? And so further investigation of this theme might help us understand that part of it, that dimension of the story more fully. Like, what does it mean?
Yes, and the whole life of Jesus, where he is teaching, he does a lot of teaching, interpreting that teaching. We can interpret that teaching as another way that Jesus is rescuing his people from their sins by encouraging them to reduce the patriarchal privilege. So being anti-patriarchal sins. So if there's less murder and adultery in society is better off. And that seems to be one of the ways that Jesus is saving his people from their sins, is teaching men how to be making less patriarchal sins. Yeah. Right.
Well, this is excellent. Thank you so much, Tim, Dr. Lewis, for this interview.
You're welcome.
I hope a lot of people listen to this and pay more attention to your work, and that it begins to influence more scholarship and more writing on Matthew, because I think this is a real key, interpretive key for understanding Matthew.
Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's been good. Thank you.
And the title of your upcoming book?
It's called The Poetics of Matthew 1. And the subtitle is the references to mothers and other patterns.
Excellent. And by poetics, I never heard this definition of poetics, but poetics is understanding the patterns.
It's got there's several different aspects to poetics, but for me, it's about understanding how do the patterns work, how do things fit together, how does it all come together, what are the writing techniques that make it what it is.
Excellent. So thank you, and we'll wrap it up here. This has been a special episode of Bible Study, Parody and Subversion in Matthew's Gospel.